Francis raised several important questions. And the first is the general distrust of the judicial system on the mainland. And that is maybe more generally extended to the mainland government. But as that last slide indicated, people are not blaming the situation on Beijing. The focus is not even on the police. The focus is very much on the government of Hong Kong, and a frustration with that government's slow reaction to this public boiling. The attention to police violence, the question of police practices, very much in evidence here. And that's why a central concern is this investigation, to have some sort of independent investigation. We now get to hear from our third Hong Kong academic, Samson Yuen, who comes to us from Lingnan University. Like the others, he has been doing polling. He's been out with his team among the protesters, among the counter-protesters, and this sort of thing. Samson teaches political science at Lingnan, and he's done a lot of work on issues of how authoritarian governments and then hybrid governments, especially focusing on the governments of Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan, and looking at issues of civil society. And of course, this is an expression of civil society. Prior to becoming an academic, he's published widely in academic journals, but also the popular press. He worked as a management consultant. Professor Samson Yuen.
Hi everyone, my name is Samson Yuen, and I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science at Lingnan University in Hong Kong. First of all, I would like to thank Clayton and the USC China Institute for inviting me to share our research findings on the Hong Kong protests since June. Unfortunately, I cannot be here in person tonight to share the results with you, but I'm very glad to be doing this over Skype, and I'm happy to answer your question after my presentation. So to begin with the methodology, our research team consists of several academics, including me and Professor Francis Lee, who is also speaking with you tonight. Since June 9th, we have conducted a total of 22 protest on-site surveys with a sample size of over 10,000 respondents. We expect this sample to be still growing because we are still doing the surveys whenever there are mass protests happening. The response rate has been very high, over 85%, which is much higher than the international average of around 60 to 70%. And we believe that one reason is that the lack of democracy in Hong Kong really makes people willing to speak with researchers and also journalists in the protest site. So the fieldwork team surveyed the protest participants through three sampling options. So the first is that the protesters will be presented with a QR code where they will fill in an online-based questionnaire through their smartphone in the protest site. The second is that they will be handed a leaflet on which there is also a QR code on it, and a protester can take it home and fill it out in their own capacity that night after the protest. And the third is the more traditional pen and paper approach, where our helpers will fill in a survey together with a protester on a face-to-face basis. So the combination of the three options is aimed at balancing between getting a large enough sample size and also ensuring that this sample is representative of the protest participants. As you can imagine, using the QR code or a smartphone will allow us to expand the sample size, but at the same time, because of the digital biases, we will have to balance it through the traditional pen and paper approach, the face-to-face approach. So who are the protesters? This is the data, the roundup from 12 surveys since June 9th with a total sample of over 6,000 people. We can see that there are slightly more male than female protesters In terms of the age, it's a very youthful protest with over 70% of people who are under the age of 40 years old and over 50% under the age of 30 years old. In terms of education, it's a very highly educated protest with 75% of people claiming that they have or are receiving tertiary education, which means university level education in Hong Kong. In terms of the class identification, there is a fair mix between middle-class protester and also grassroots lower-class protester, which I think suggests that this protest is not driven by economic grievances, and that's why there are many people who claim that they are middle class came out to the street, took to the street. So if we look into their motivation, why were people protesting? In every survey, we will present several options to them to ask them what are the motivations and how important are these motivations that explain why you are on the street today. So you can see that there is a big contrast between the first 5 lines and the last line. The first 5 lines are basically the demands that we have been hearing: bill withdrawal, police brutality, and independent commission of inquiry, whereas the yellow line, the bottom line, is the official resignation. And you can see that asking for the resignation of major officials or the chief executive, Carrie Lam, is not the primary motivation for protesters. They are not looking for a quick fix of the system. What they're looking for is for the government to withdraw the bill, to address police brutality through an independent commission of inquiry, and also to reinitiate the political reforms in Hong Kong. So they are pointing towards the system. They're not asking for certain officials to take responsibility and step down. They want a more fundamental overhaul of the system. So if we are to zoom into these 5 motivations, take a closer look at it, we can see that over time it has been changing. So for bill withdrawal, which is the gray line, in early June, it has been very high, but over time, because of the suspension of the bill by the government, the importance of it has been dropping, even though you can see there is a slight rise again in early August, but quickly it has gone down. So right now the bill has been withdrawn and we have already dropped this question. And you can see the red line, which is about police brutality. Initially, in early June, it wasn't as important as the bill withdrawal, but over time it has taken over the gray line and become the most important motivation for the protester. And also to note is the green line there, independent commission of inquiry, which is just lower than the red line, has been an important motivation for protesters as well. And this is something interesting to see is the gradual rise of calling for universal suffrage, which is the purple line there, initially rather low in early July, but over time it has been rising to the importance, to match the importance of police brutality. So protesters are also learning. They are shifting their frame from the bill itself to a more fundamental reform of the political system. We are wondering why that was the case. So why were protesters pointing towards the institutional reforms? Where did they learn about this? So we also asked about the social movement history of the protesters. So this is the data drawn from 6 surveys with a total N of more than 3,000 people. We can see that over nearly 60% of the participants have participated in the 2014 umbrella movement. And we also asked what was their first experience, what was their first time joining a protest, because we believe that the first time of joining protest will actually influence the attitudes of protesters towards their aims. So you can see that only 17% of the people, the yellow box there, are newcomers. So this protest is their first experience. So all the rest, 83%, have some sort of protest experience before. 22% of them participated, the first time was umbrella movement in 2014, whereas 26% said that the first protest experience was June 4th, which happens every year in June to commemorate the Tiananmen movement. We also asked about how protesters participated in the protest. So this shows you the percentage of respondents who participated in a certain act. So you can see the mode of participation was very diverse and very committed as well. Around 1/3 of participants donated something, or money or supplies, to the protest at some point. Around 40 to 60%, they engage in what we call logistic action, basically passing supplies around in the protest. Around 10 to 15% engage in defensive action on the front line to defend against the police. Well, a lot of people, obviously, they have written on what we call the Lingnan wall on Post-it. They put on the messages on the wall in different neighborhoods in Hong Kong. We can also see that this is a very digitally enabled protests, with a lot of people participating actively online. They have 60 to 80% share protest material online. Around the same percentage support the protest by tweeting or writing posts online, and more, 70 to 80% have signed an online petition. Only a very tiny proportion said they have participated in none of these activities. In terms of the channels of mobilization and the source of news, we can see that to compare traditional media news and digital media, of course, we see that the protesters are mainly relying on the digital media. It is their main source of information in the protests. In terms of the social media usage, you can see that Facebook and Telegram had a very high usage there. A Telegram is an encrypted messaging app that helps protesters to get the most updated information about the protests and also coordinate their protests. I think something to note is the LIHKG, which is a Reddit-like forum, which also has a very high usage in the protests in Hong Kong. And protesters use the forum to deliberate tactics, to propose interesting ideas, and also to do some sort of collective reflection of something that they have done wrongly, strategic mistakes. They will reflect it on the forum. We also notice there is a high degree of solidarity among the protesters. The gray line here is how much they agree with the statement that protesters agree with the radical protesters' goal, but not their violent tactics. So a very low percentage said that they do not agree with violent tactics. Whereas you can see the three lines above, protesters thinks that the radical protesters are speaking for them. They are on the same boat with them, and at the same time, they are also one of these people. So you can see it's a very highly cohesive and united movement. It's very difficult for the government to split the movement by saying that one group is radical and another group is peaceful, because these two factions of protesters basically see themselves as on the same boat. So to conclude our findings, we can see that the protest is a very youthful, very highly educated, and a cross-class protest. The protest also does not have an obvious leader. Of course, there are many unknown leaders in the movement, but overall we can describe the movement as a leaderless movement, but it is not a disorganized movement. It is a very organized movement using social media, using digital technologies. We can also see a diverse and digitally enabled participation with the possibility of tactical innovation, which is very different from other digitally motivated protests around the world, such as the Arab Spring. We can see there is a very strong solidarity among the protesters, but at the same time, they are still able to exercise some sort of collective restraint. So to conclude, even though I think the turnout of the protests might be going down, but dissents in Hong Kong, the grievances are there, and even though it might die down at some point, I'm sure that protests will come up again very soon. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer your question in the Q&A session. Thank you.